Richard, one of the things I love in this book and in all your books is the natural way the prose flows. It's how you communicate science to the layperson, to all of us, in such an easy, even though this is an autobiography, in such an easy way. How would you describe what you do different than most scientists in the world? Because the way you disseminate scientific knowledge is very, very easy for the average person to understand.
It's kind of you to say that's what I do. I don't know that I can put into words whatever it is that I do. I know a few things. I know that I read through my stuff very often. And when I begin the day's work, I usually read through whatever I did the day before to get a kind of run at it. And I tend, when I'm doing that, without really thinking about it, without noticing, I tend to be reading it through the eyes of another person. Another person who may be in my head for no very good reason. I may just happen to have picked up the phone and talked to this person, or may have had a letter from this person. And so this person is in my mind when I read through it. And that automatically makes me spot things which this other person wouldn't understand or wouldn't like. So that's one thing I do. I'm very conscious of cadence. I'm very conscious of the sound of the words, the sound of the sentences. You want to make the sentences not all the same length. You want to make them so they don't all, as it were, follow the same tune. Sometimes I read it aloud to my wife, sometimes she reads it aloud to me, and hearing another voice, especially a voice of a trained actor as she is, reading your own stuff, tells you whether it flows right, tells you whether it's got the rhythm right, whether it's indeed understandable, whether it's clear, whether it's vulnerable to misunderstanding, whether there's a repetition of a word which shouldn't be there. Those are a couple of the things that I do. I don't mind using a wide vocabulary. I don't shrink from sending the reader to the dictionary. I think it's I rather enjoy when I'm reading books.
But I don't think the reader minds it. It's just it's very accessible to the average person, and they could replicate it to other people in conversation and other stuff. And I think the results have shown being #1 bestseller for many of these books over time.
Well, I like to think that that's true. My uncle Collier Dawkins, my father's younger brother, was a legendarily good teacher, and he used to say that he wasn't very bright, and that therefore he had to work very hard to understand something. And if you have to work hard to understand something, then you could explain it to other people. And I think that applies to me as well. I feel that I have to struggle to understand. I may go to a colleague to explain something to me. My colleague Alan Graffan, for example, who was my student and then later became my mentor, I go to him and ask him to explain things to me, and I make him explain it. He's much too bright, so to him it's just easy, and I make him explain it until I understand it, and then I can explain it to others. So yes, but talking about Uncle Collier, there's a nice story about him in the book. He was returning on the last train from London, and to Oxford. And in the Oxford station car park, there's an arm which you have to put money in the slot, raise the arm so you can get your car out. And the arm mechanism had broken, and the station staff had all gone home because it was midnight. And so the cars in the car park were all locked in and couldn't get out. My uncle was on his bike, as he usually was, and so it wasn't a problem for him. But he sympathised with all these people with cars, and so he very altruistically took the law into his hands, broke the arm, and marched up to the station master's office, plonked it down outside the door of the station master's office with a note, giving his name and address and explaining why he had done it. And he was prosecuted and fined. And years later, after his death, I happened to meet an old physicist called Nicholas Curti, and he said, when he heard my name, he said, "Dawkins, are you any relation of the man who broke the arm?" And I said, "Well, yes, I'm his nephew." He said, come, let me shake your hand. Your uncle was a hero.
Very funny.